Hello, 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 everybody. Thank you for joining me again 1 week later. Sorry for the delay. So yeah, I'm just gonna get right into it. We're gonna pick up where we left off on the Hasan Piker versus Ethan Klein debate over the one-state solution. Let's do it. I also, just FYI, I made the playback speed be a little bit faster, 1.5, just because that's how I like to listen to things. I'm a very fast listener. Oh, sorry, my cats are getting into a fight. You see, this is happening live. Guys, no fighting, okay? No fighting. We love each other. Nope, 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 nope. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, and we're back. We're back. Sorry for the emergency. Let's get into it. Oh no, they're gonna fight again. Guys, no, 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 no. No, no, no. Ah, making peace is very hard. It's so hard to do. But they love each other very much. They're brothers, not I mean, from another mother, of course. But okay. I hope you're doing well. And yeah, this is designed for you to sort of have something to listen to if you're cleaning or doing something. Let's get into it.
Obviously, the hardest and being the most entitled to peace and reparations and lands and stuff. But again, let's go back. So Hamas was created in opposition. You say the peace talks back then wasn't even realistic. So yeah, this is during the most magnanimous time in Israel's history, where everybody thought peace was possible, and even the beloved prime minister, who was considered a dove, this was the offer. And so again, not good enough. However, well, yeah, looking at now, I'm just being real. Like, you have to see how impossible it is.
So Ethan is talking about Itzhak Rabin, who was the Israeli prime minister in the 90s, who signed the Oslo Accords. And the way he's presenting him as if Palestinians were offered this like amazing deal that nobody could refuse. What Palestinians were offered is less than a state. And Rabin even said that specifically, that the quote I just made, that they would have less than a state. And that's what ended up happening after Oslo. So this idea that like they rejected a deal that no one could refuse, they accepted it. They shook hands. And Oslo promised that it would, after 5 years, that after 5 years, the Palestinian state would be established on the 1967 borders, and that never happened. Instead, Israel expanded all of its settlements in the West Bank, disengaged from Gaza, and we are where we are today. And none of that goes to explain why Palestinians are still being denied the right of return, an international right, an international law that in other cases, historically speaking, for example, in Bosnia, 500,000 refugees returned to their original homes with backing by the entire international community. Sorry, I'll be right back. Mumu, we can't. No, no, no. Sorry, he was trying to eat my legs under the table. Mo, come on. I hope there are some cat lovers who are going to be watching this. You know, if you have two cat boys, you will understand how how they take all of your attention. By the way, I am a cat supremacist, meaning I prefer them over dogs. I think they're delightful. I also think, I mean, they purr, which dogs do not, but I understand it might be a controversial thing to throw out there. Okay, Mumu, can you please get up? Just for an hour, okay? Maybe he's reacting negatively to the propaganda talking points that Ethan is making. You know, I'm just gonna let it play. I'm gonna let it play and hope Mumu doesn't eat my legs. Okay. Sorry about the delay, everyone.
It's just a non-starter. It's just a non-starter with Israel. It will just never, ever, ever happen. Another question I have to ask you, I guess, going along is like, do you think
liberal dash, nothing good will ever happen, so settle for the less than the crumbs that we are not even offering you. Never ever. You know what will never ever happen? Anyone who's pro-Palestine, including myself, giving up on Palestinians' right to return to their original homes. I was sort of in the process of making the point that before my beautiful cat interrupted me, that after the Bosnian genocide, more than 500,000 people returned to their original homes after previously being expelled. And it was a country of only about 3.5 million people. Ali Abu Nima, who's an amazing journalist and writer, he wrote several books, including One Country and The Battle for Justice in Palestine. And he's made that point that in Bosnia, the entire international community supported refugees returning to their original homes, and that right was respected. Why can't it be respected for Palestinians? Why is that so unreasonable, so out of the realm of possibility? It's racist. I don't know what else to... There's no reason why the right of return can apply to anybody else in the world who has suffered genocide, but not Palestinians. It's crazy. It's crazy to have to sort of argue with that reluctance, that stubbornness that's coming from the Zionist side.
a lasting peace is possible while Hamas is in power?
I think that in order for Hamas to actually be dealt with appropriately and for it to no longer exist, the major goal of Hamas needs to be eviscerated, which is a secular democratic republic would completely destroy any kind of legitimate need for violent emancipation. It's over at that point. Without the apartheid, there's no reason for any of this to exist.
You're saying if they lift the blockade, Hamas will just dissolve.
Hamas in and of itself is already not a very popular entity, both in Gaza, but I guess ironically a little bit more popular in the West Bank as years have passed by. The only group that is less popular than Hamas in the eyes of Palestinians, however, is the Palestinian Authority. To me, this is Israel's arrogance, the way that the Israeli governments under Netanyahu and under even more peaceful, supposedly more dovish leadership like even
sorry, just to pause Hasan there. Sorry, Hasan, didn't mean to interrupt you there. You're making good points. I just wanted to add that the Palestinian Authority was created because of the Oslo process that Ethan Klein mentioned. So the Palestinian Authority sort of became this like quote unquote representative government of the West Bank, unelected. George W. Bush, I believe, was the one who appointed Mahmoud Abbas, who is still ruling the Palestinian Authority with the full backing of the apartheid state. And they haven't had elections since then. They're not allowed to have elections. They're not allowed to run anybody else except Mahmoud Abbas, who's, I believe, is in his 80s or 90s. So that kind of mirrors the US political system where we have geriatric people who, I mean, except in the US, they're elected, of course. But the Oslo process sort of created this fake state, really kind of in a structure of a dictatorship, where the Palestinian Authority its number one job is to police Palestinians, crack down on resistance anywhere in the West Bank, and sort of play as the police for hire to the apartheid state, basically doing their dirty work.
Barak, the Palestinian Authority has always been used as a part of the Israeli security apparatus. The Palestinian Authority collaborates with the Israeli government. They actually give up resistance members. They literally give up random Palestinians to the Israeli government so they can be unlawfully detained. This, of course, has created in the minds of Palestinians a anger towards like the one group that is supposed to be collaborating with Israel. Israel had every opportunity throughout this time frame to show that the secular Fatah party was actually not simply a cutout that is simply there to oppress Palestinians, but with a Palestinian face, but instead like offered genuine security assurances, genuine security commitments, and a good faith interest in like not continuously expanding in the West Bank. But they didn't do that. They did the exact opposite, dangling the two-state solution as a carrot while simultaneously continuing on with their expansive policies in the West Bank.
I don't believe you answered the question. Do you think a lasting peace is possible while Hamas is in power?
Hamas will not be in power if there is lasting peace. That's my point.
Okay. So you're saying, well, no. The lasting peace doesn't come first.
I have to say,
first you have to deal with Hamas.
It doesn't sound like, I could be wrong. It doesn't sound like Ethan is really listening to what Hasan is saying or really like processing the points where, and I think the major point that I think he might be missing is that Hamas would have no reason to exist if there was actual democracy between the river and the sea. the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. If Palestinians had the right to vote and return, which is their right under international law, there would be no reason for Hamas. And also Hamas, who he speaks about in very unambiguous terms, shall we say, has recognized the state of Israel multiple times. Okay, like they made the calculation that recognizing Israel would be, I guess, better for their political image, despite how people might feel about recognizing an apartheid state. They did it anyway. So this caricature of oh, we could only have peace if Hamas was out of power. Like, what about the Israeli government? We would have peace if there was no apartheid, right? If people had equal rights from the river to the sea and allowed to return, there would be nothing to resist. They're resisting occupation. They're resisting genocide.
You cannot deal with Hamas by bombing Gaza. You can only deal with it in it's a political problem.
But how do you do politics with a terrorist group like Hamas?
Well, Israel has done politics with Hamas many times over. There has been ceasefires in between time and time again. So that's not even even if we're having this conversation,
well,
Israel itself is able to.
First of all, agreeing to a humanitarian ceasefire.
No, not even. I'm not talking about like a humanitarian pause. I'm talking like ceasefires in between different sieges that have occurred into Gaza.
Okay. The ceasefire is different from having a peace partner.
A ceasefire is different than having a peace partner, but that is one form of negotiations, is what I mean. And
so
also, not only that,
it's such a big difference. I don't think it's fair to say that Hamas would be a good partner in peace with Israel. Do you think Hamas would be a good partner in peace with Israel?
No, I do not. I do not believe that Hamas would be a good peace partner with Israel. I also do not believe Israel is a good peace partner for Palestinians in general. I think that is.
We agree. We agree.
So Hamas in itself,
just again to draw it back to that, is that the one-state solution will never happen, and starting from there is a non-starter. That's my thesis. But go ahead about Hamas.
Here is what is important to understand. And this is not just my assessment, this is the assessment of the likes of Norm Finkelstein as well. And it's backed by actual sentiment expressed by...
This is not a popular opinion that a lot of people share, but I feel like I have to sort of be upfront about that. Fuck Norman Finkelstein. And I'm saying that not because he's an anti-Zionist, I'm saying that because he is a Zionist, okay? I don't want to elaborate. I mean, I should elaborate. For anyone who's wondering, Norman Finkelstein's history with BDS, specifically, who he insulted, denigrated, went against. He badgered BDS for not supporting the two-state solution. That's why BDS doesn't fuck with Norman Finkelstein. And you'll never hear people on the independent left ever criticize Norman Finkelstein because he gives them fucking views. But if you want to know how Palestinians feel about Norman Finkelstein, Palestinians who have been in the movement, which is something that I didn't even know until like a few years ago. I really recommend Googling Ali Abunima's article, which he wrote for Al Jazeera, sort of breaking down line by line Norman Finkelstein's positions on the two-state solution, the one-state solution, and why, and how he, and also from Palestinians who I personally know, Norman Finkelstein has insulted them for challenging him on why he doesn't support the right of return. The right of return for Palestinians who were expelled in 1948. Okay, this is very, I guess, opening a can of worms. But I guess I just want to point out where I'm coming from, so you know my bias when it comes to Norman Finkelstein.
Likud party members, but of course Benjamin Netanyahu too. Hamas's and its existence as a violent Islamist fundamentalist cutout greatly benefits thwarting any kind of Palestinian nation-state project. This is not my design. This is the design of the Israeli government. This is something that Benjamin Netanyahu has openly mentioned time and time again as well. Last time around in 2019, where he said, if you want to thwart a Palestinian nation-statehood, what you must do is only govern against Hamas, because everyone sees them as terrorists. Everyone sees them as violent Islamist fundamentalist terrorists, and we can always deal with Hamas because we control how high the flames go.
Who else is there to talk to?
First of all, there are actual leaders within the Palestinian movement that you could prop up, like the Palestinian Authority, instead of utilizing Fatah as...
That's what that's what they want to do, but like, I mean...
No, they don't want to do that either.
I think the goal is to remove Hamas and install the Palestinian Authority, but...
Yes, but Palestinian Authority is deeply unpopular and is seen as a puppet of the Israeli government.
will not accept the PLO because they'll look like stooges to the Israeli government. So if the wall is lifted up, so who's in charge? Is it Hamas? Is it the PLO? How is this happening?
At this stage, before the walls are lifted up or anything, what needs to happen is a ceasefire so that there can be an actual continued negotiation to release the hostages right? That's number one, first and foremost. So first you need to do a ceasefire. Then you need to do a prisoner swap, a hostage release for the
You're starting
Palestinians
too far back. Let's just
Okay.
go to the point where,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
And then
We're
beyond
doing
that,
Yeah.
what needs to happen is just like it happened in 2006, which was genuinely disastrous, even though it was a Bush-backed election. Elections need to take place so that, and Palestinians need to get security assurances from the state of Israel. Israel has to show good faith for the first time since its inception, so that Palestinians can have a normal political process and be able to actually vote for a group of individuals that would lead them in civil governance without, becoming a militant faction. In this process, I do not believe that it would be Hamas.
I could be wrong, but I think what sorry, I think what Hasan is saying, not Hamas. I think what Hasan is saying. Sorry, I just the ha thing in there. I think he's calling for elections to be held in Gaza, but not elections between the river and the sea where everyone gets to participate. And that's where I'm coming from. That's what I think should be happening, like free and fair democratic elections for the first time, the way post-apartheid South Africa had them. And Nelson Mandela, who used to be designated as a terrorist, was elected by the overwhelming majority and became the first president of a free South Africa. If I don't believe that, I mean, it's not for me, obviously, to decide, but like I feel like, I mean, it's true that people in Gaza haven't had elections since 2006, which is insane, but also just having elections in the tiny concentration camp is not justice. You should have elections between the river and the sea under one democratic free government. That's what we should be looking towards, and not get caught up in like this, like, oh, first we need a hostage exchange and then we need a ceasefire. There has been a we were this debate took place, I believe, like 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And despite the ceasefire that's been declared, people are still dying in Gaza every single day from malnutrition, from diseases. It's a concentration camp. So the solution isn't to have elections inside the concentration camp. The solution is to have post-apartheid, free and fair elections where Palestinians could vote for a Palestinian president from the river to the sea, which is their right.
That wins out. Most Palestinians do not consider Hamas to be good at civil governance in general. They are not as popular as Israel makes it seem they are. They're simply the only option the Palestinians seemingly have in retaliating violently against Israel in times when Israel violates the ceasefire protocols by doing a steady maintenance of the apartheid structure that it maintains. Anytime Sheikh Jarrah is raided, anytime Al-Aqsa is raided every year, anytime there's a Flag Day protest that occurs in Jerusalem, like these are all incredibly violent expressions of the apartheid regime deliberately turning around and stoking the fires in the West Bank against people that have no legal recourse, against people that are led under military mandate.
I agree with everything you're saying.
And
but to go back
is,
to go back to the original point, don't you think it's more likely? Like, I think this is infinitely more likely, even though it's very difficult, especially now. But to remove all the settlements, just fuck all of them off, those scumbag freaks. Give it back to Palestinians, and you can do these security assurances and the negotiations and all of that while Palestine has its own sovereign country. That's good. And like I think in the original idea, there was even going to be
that's more violent than a one state. Like, you think Israel would be able to successfully take out 471,000 settlers living in the West Bank, and also another 300,000, almost 300,000 more plus living in East Jerusalem as well, which is occupied. But
so just to throw something out here, those settlements in the West Bank that Hasan mentioned and Ethan mentioned, that they're both against, at least that's what it sounds like. Those are illegal under international law. So even if it's difficult to remove them, that's the right thing to do, even under a one democratic state. Those settlements are encroaching on people who have lived in that land in the West Bank for hundreds of years, decades. So they should be removed regardless. They're also violent. The reason why the Israeli government sponsors these outposts in the West Bank is because they're trying to expand, they're trying to terrorize Palestinians, Palestinian communities who live in the West Bank. And the people who move there often move from Western countries. They come, there's the famous case of Muhammad al-Kurd, author, poet, activist, and the guy from Brooklyn who came to his house and decided to just colonize it. And he came from Brooklyn. And, for people who have seen the those awful videos. He tells them, "Oh, if I'm not going to steal your house, someone else is going to steal your house." Like, sorry, Jacob, you can go back to Brooklyn, where you came from 5 years ago, whenever that was, right? Like, those people who literally just arrived like 2 seconds before and came specifically to the West Bank to terrorize Palestinians, they should not be there. And that infrastructure in terms of like the housing units, like who's going to live in them, who's going to, that have already been built for Jewish settlers, what's going to happen. I believe those housing units should be given to Palestinians who have been terrorized and harassed for decades. And of course, those settlers are not going to go into the night without being difficult, but I think that's where the international community should come in. I mean, we need to look at what the right thing to do is, and it's not right to just let them continue on living in extreme wealth. Some of these settlements also like hijack water resources from Palestinian communities and redirect them to settler housing units where they're Jewish only. So they're like, it's like the Jim Crow South, where white people had, in the midst of all of these African American neighborhoods, they would have housing units that are just living in extreme luxury, but for white people only. They had a pool or whatever the fuck. Those housing units that are in the West Bank that are right now exclusive to Jewish people, I think should be given to Palestinians. That's where I stand personally.
Now also permanently under Israeli rule.
Do you think that fully integrating the populations would be less violent?
Yes, I do.
Dude, there's no way. Like, all it takes is one thing. We've seen this time and time again in the history of this region. Like, it just takes one thing of like a bunch of psychotic Jewish fundamentalists going and doing horrible fucking acts, and then the Palestinians respond by doing horrific acts, and then you got to all out. Like, it takes so little to create all out war.
I agree.
So little, dude.
I agree, which is why there needs to be an international presence and a steady pressure to ensure that that there is political pressure applied on specifically the Israeli side to ensure that there's a lasting peace process. This has happened time and time again. It happened in the dissolution of the apartheid state. It happened with the Good Friday Agreement that ended the troubles, and it always will happen, because I believe.
And I think, just to add on to something he's saying here, the Good Friday Agreement, I believe, happened between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And just on the topic of de-radicalization, there is definitely going to need to be some mechanism to de-radicalize the Jewish Israeli society in a post-apartheid world. We would have to gather experts from people who studied the Rwandan genocide, the Bosnian genocide, genocides all over the world, and have drawn lessons from those awful instances to how did they manage to de-radicalize for example, the Serbian population? What kind of an education framework worked for adults, for kids? For kids, it would be, I think, a lot easier to preach coexistence to, because racism is taught since childhood. It's not a biological reality. It's an educational reality. And there are tons of Palestinian experts who have studied this, and I think would be very well equipped to lead this transitional process. Also, like Palestinians who right now hold Israeli citizenship from the Zionist state, some of them are fluent in both Arabic and Hebrew. They could be a very important bridge when it comes to educating specifically and I think that the radicalization applies to the Jewish Israeli population who has been committing genocide. Okay, it's not the Palestinian population who has been committed genocide. It's the Zionist state. So, and it's going to be hard and it's going to be difficult, but we have to start thinking about the future, or as if it's happening tomorrow. We have to be ready.
That no matter how much we fight, I think peaceful solutions are our natural state. We want to fucking coexist with one another. And the example I always use is when you look at Europe, right? Which is a borderless utopia now, like the EU, the European Union. There's freedom of movement. Those guys have fought one another since the cousin fucker days for far longer than they've actually peacefully coexisted with one another. And now it seems impossible to think of a time when these guys would, kill one another for 100 years. I mean, World War II happened not that long ago. The Holocaust happened not that long ago. And now when you think about it, Germany can peacefully coexist with all of the other surrounding countries. So
is that the timeline we're on, like 100 years or something?
It would take multiple decades, but it's not like, I mean, it happened almost instantaneously after World War II. When you look at like civil governance in Germany, it was almost instant.
You mean after a horrific world war where like tens of millions of people died and countries were forever changed and traumatized, then they were able to create a lasting peace?
Yes. And that does not happen. That does not need to happen.
Okay.
No, I'm saying even in a situation like that,
what's
you
the
can find
parallel
peace.
to the Middle East?
Even in a situation like that where millions died, right? Millions, tens of millions died.
And also like Ethan seems to be thinking that the solution is to keep segregation going, because segregation means less violence. For who? For the Palestinian victims who are undergoing a genocide right now, even though there's an apartheid wall. It's actually, segregation creates more violence than integration. That's the whole point.
You can still find lasting peace almost overnight. And that's precisely what I'm
saying is that
it's perfectly reasonable to assume, as long as there is international pressure and that there is accountability and control and a committee designed specifically to dish out punishments for war criminals on both sides, according to the International Criminal Court, when there's a Truth and Reconciliation Committee in a similar capacity to the aftermath of World War II, and there's reparations afforded and a right to return to Palestinians, there will be no need for violence. This has happened in the past and it can happen again. It seems unlikely because we're very
Sorry, just to pause us on there. I just want to, say that I completely understand and relate to people who feel that the international institutions that we have right now are worse than inadequate. They're pathetic, right? Like the United Nations has not been able or willing to stop this genocide. They have a veto system on the Security Council that lets the US just veto anytime people want to ceasefire, anytime. It's worse than not perfect. Like the international system we have today, it's complicity. And I'm very disillusioned with the international mechanisms we have for ensuring justice. For example, also like the Bosnian genocide wasn't declared a genocide until 2001, so almost 9 years after it started, and that's a mess, right? Like they didn't stop the genocide in Bosnia. Only after, if you can only like condemn something 9 years after the fact, it's too late. And it's too late for almost 100,000 people, if not more, who died in Gaza because of this genocide. It's so I don't know what kind of a framework we would need to have. I mean, we have to have international law, right? In terms of a set of agreements or whatever to ensure to ensure justice and freedom for all. But the system we have now has no enforcement mechanism. And that's something that I think smarter people than me will have to look at and think about. How do we enforce peace, real peace? And real justice, and not just stand on the sidelines and write reports 9 years later, because people deserve better. We deserve better.
The thinking like, oh, what is going on right in front of my eyes is exactly how things have been in my lifetime, and it can never change. Except it absolutely has changed, and it absolutely can change, and it will change. And that's why I use other historic examples like I mentioned, Ireland or the ANC and apartheid South Africa. This happened in our lifetime.
If you look at peace in Europe, I think this was possible from rising from the ashes of a ruined continent where unspeakable horrors that people didn't even think were possible occurred, capped off with a nuclear bomb. And by the way, Europe, the characterization of Europe as a utopia is interesting. But I want to say this: you saying sanctions against America or sanctions against Israel, you think would influence Israel to drop their borders? How have sanctions against Russia been going?
Thank you for saying that. Russia is a foreign adversary that has always positioned itself with the full knowledge that support from America, or support or a trade relationship with America is always on an uneven footing. So Russia, as an economic power, has never had to rely on America being able to meddle in their affairs in any meaningful capacity. Sanctions against our enemies, our foreign adversaries, oftentimes do not work. As a matter of fact, it's a means to galvanize the existing regime and its brutality. It doesn't work against Iran. It doesn't work
Israel
against
can
Russia.
forge the same alliances.
No,
You
it
think
can't.
China and Russia and North Korea and whoever the fuck else gives a fuck? You know what I mean?
No, it can't. I don't think so.
It can and it would.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Especially because like the quality, look at the quality of life in like a North Korea, for example. If you're permanently isolated from the rest of the Western world, right? It's not something that Israelis that are used to like a relatively comfortable existence, especially like one that with such close association to the Western world, would ever be on board with.
Dude, Israel is extremely resourceful. They've proven that from their inception. There's no way they will ever drop the border of their sovereignty. It will never ever happen. I understand everything you're saying, and I think what you're saying is interesting about like potentially over a long span of time strengthening diplomatic ties with the neighboring countries and stuff. I guess it's possible, in like 50 or 60 years that the landscape could be so vastly.
Oh my God, we have a breakthrough moment. Oh my God, this is I mean, this is sad because this is forever. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, the ending, but this is a breakthrough moment. This is another moment where you think, oh my God, like, is it possible that maybe, so, I mean, Ethan went from, it will never, ever, 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 ever happen, democracy between the river and the sea, never, ever, 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 never, ever, ever. And he went from that to maybe in 60 years, maybe in 50 years. That shows that he sort of understands that the moral side is with the one-state solution. Like it's harder for him to deny that that's the just path forward. I mean, you see, this is why anti-racist work is so hard, but it can be rewarding. Again, it didn't work out that way. It didn't work out, but it could have. It could have. He could have. You see, he was seeing the light very briefly. He could, like, if he only moved in that direction further, if he was only like, if he was made to feel that it was possible, or without, and that it would create less violence in the long term to have integration the way, the North and the South in the United States, post-apartheid South Africa, despite the immense amount of imperfections that are very valid and worth pointing out, equality is always better than inequality. So you see, he got very close here, and I just want to, acknowledge that.
Than it is now. That maybe if I were to be there and see it then, I could be like, okay, maybe this can work. But as of right now, looking at the situation, I can tell you, as someone who's lived in Israel, as someone who knows tons of Israelis, it will never happen. The Jews, they said they came out of Europe, and
I take everything I said back. We made one step forward, 3 steps back. So I apologize.
they said never again. I know a lot of people find it ironic because of what they're doing to Palestinians. I'm not defending them, but they believe that. They went to Israel and they said never again. And they fucking made nuclear bombs and they made a big ass army and they fucking believe that shit. Trust me on that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do trust you. I hear it. I see it. I know. You cannot maintain a apartheid regime without like a steady flow of constantly reinforcing that through propaganda. Steady flow of propaganda is a necessity. That's precisely the reason why a lot of these positions are learned and reaffirmed time and time again. And I completely understand that. You can never maintain an apartheid state forever. It just doesn't happen.
I want to emphasize, I'm not moralizing anything I'm talking about. I'm just from pragmatics. In 1981, America was giving Israel almost 10% of its economy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In 2020, the current aid they're getting is about 4 billion. Is that right?
It's more than that, but I mean, just the military aid alone is 4 billion. Yes.
Okay, that's 1% of their economy.
Yeah, that's 1% of the economy is massive, especially when you're thinking
not
about
enough for them to fucking remove their borders. Not even close.
No, 1% of the economy is huge, Ethan.
So 1%.
Think about it this way. Okay. The UAW strike on the big 3 was slated to eat away at I think like 5% of all of the states. Like that would have been devastating. It would cause economic collapse. And sanctions don't mean just like the direct aid. Sanctions don't necessarily just mean like all the weapons that we're giving to Israel. It also means like stopping companies from working with Israel as well. Like this is how sanctions operate.
I feel like,
and just to point out something that I think other people have also pointed out, long before I'm gonna be saying this point, but South Africa had an arms embargo imposed on it for much less violence than what we're seeing today against Palestinians. So if we could do it with South Africa, there's no reason, practical, pragmatic, realistic, whatever word, liberal euphemism you want to use, there's no reason to not apply it now to the apartheid state in West Asia. Unless you don't want to impose any sanctions on the apartheid state in West Asia for your own personal reasons and, whatever. But it really upsets me every time I sort of realize that it's as if we have moved backwards in terms of from an international law perspective and justice. The fact that South Africa had an arms embargo imposed when they killed a lot less people than the apartheid state in West Asia is killing Palestinians now, almost 100,000 people. I mean, each one of those people is a life, is a world, is a universe. And still no arms embargo. Still we only get, like, people say, oh, maybe we'll pause offensive weapons, maybe we'll pause defensive, maybe. Like, it's insane how our politics has only gotten worse over the year. Like, the amount of deception that goes on between American politicians and what they promise or what they say and what they actually do, the gap has only grown larger. And I think because now we live in the age of the internet, it's a lot easier to call out politicians when they're lying, like all of them, except I think Rashida Tlaib. She's like the one, I think, who has stayed so true and impressively strong. Everybody else in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they're all assholes who try to triangulate the right messaging around what they say they're going to do, but none of them are actually entertaining seriously an arms embargo. None of them, except Rashida.
Since Israel's become, they really, with the amount of tech and like inventions and IP shit they have, I feel like it would be really hard for a lot of companies to sever those ties. And Pegasus is just one good example of it.
I understand what you're saying, but it absolutely can happen.
But 1% is enough to convince Israel, who is afraid that they'll be genocide.
No, 1% is just the weapons, the amount of weapons that we're giving, because it would be significantly more damaging to their GDP. This is a good take.
Yeah,
Polygon Primitive says the 2008 collapse was a 4% GDP contraction. So like that led to the 2008 collapse. 1% is simply just the weapons that we're giving, like the Iron Dome and things of that nature, like the Tamir interceptor missiles and stuff. So beyond that, it would be far worse than that. But also, before we even talk about like Israel's economy with American contributions, according to the Financial Times, Israel's economy is slated to collapse already. I think Standard & Poor's warned Israel even before the bombing campaign started that if they were to try to maintain a steady occupation of Gaza, that their credit rating would change dramatically, because 300,000 reservists and all of these Merkava tanks and all of the rockets that Israel is utilizing, no matter how much America gives them support, is obviously going to have a long-lasting and damaging impact on the Israeli economy. Israel's economy at this moment is already in a troublesome situation, even without boycotts and even without sanctions. I don't think that the situation.
And also, I have to say that I think the argument for an arms embargo and economic sanctions is one based in human rights and the violation of international law. It shouldn't be based on, like, in terms of, like, but what would the credit rating would be, blah, blah, blah. Like, what about the high-tech companies? Like, who are we centering here? The victims of a genocide, Palestinians, or are we centering companies that do business and their well-being and all of this? Like, I think the focus here seems to be very off. An arms embargo is the moral thing to do from a human rights perspective, regardless of which companies are affected and why are they participating in genocide in the first place or in apartheid. And
situation is, as
again, you have to acknowledge that to Israelis, the dissolution of its border is literally the genocide of them. They will all die. That's how they feel.
And I already said it in the last week's stream, but this was literally word for word the argument that white South Africans made to justify not giving black South Africans rights. They were like, oh no, if we give them rights, they're gonna genocide us. They're gonna throw us into the sea. This is literally word for word what white supremacist South Africans used to say to justify endless apartheid of black South Africans. They were wrong then, and Ethan is wrong now to use literally the same talking point.
So whatever percentage you think matters, if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I cannot emphasize how fucking little it will matter to Israel ultimately if the question is dissolve your borders. It will never happen, ever. They think if they do that, they will all die. That's the perception in Israel. That's what they think. And you cannot convince them otherwise. You can't. Do you think that you can understand without being there and without living there, like that you can convince them otherwise? I don't understand I don't understand.
And just like I said last week, right until the moment apartheid fell in South Africa, white South Africans, white supremacist South Africans, the majority of them refused, were against, not in the 100%, but the vast majority of them, right until the very last moment, were against giving Black South Africans rights, equal rights. The demand was one person, one vote from the ANC. And white South Africans said no, because then we would be outnumbered, and the Black South Africans would genocide us, and they'll throw us into the sea, and we can't do that. We'll never do that. We'll never, ever, ever do that. Right until the very last second when apartheid fell. And it wasn't a good excuse then. It's not a good excuse now to keep inequality going for one more second.
And where that confidence comes from, how you can make
the
that
confidence
statement.
comes from my belief that the morally just thing, like I will always unflinchingly support the morally just cause, right? No matter what happens. If we talk about the practical application, yes, there's going to be people that are resistant to that, maybe even people who want to engage in acts of terror against that on the Israeli side, especially. But ultimately, these are solvable problems because I look at the material realities on the ground. Without American support, Israel, without Western support, unconditional support, and trade, Israel would not be able to maintain an apartheid regime, just like South Africa was not able to maintain its apartheid regime. And as long as there is more pressure from the West, this will most likely change if America finally does the righteous thing for once in its fucking life.
By the way, and I just need to make this clear because you keep saying that you support the moralistic thing. I support the moralistic thing too. I'm talking pragmatics here. I'm telling you that the one state is a non-starter. That's my point.
The pragmatism.
What are the liberal words we talked about? That you should, if you're responsible and you're not sober, and if you are, that's wonderful. But take a shot anytime a liberal say the word pragmatic, the realistic. What's the other one? I'll remember in a second.
Pragmatism
I don't have chat open. I don't know what people are saying, but I can only imagine.
Well, don't pay attention to what
and
people
by
are
the way,
saying. Don't pay attention to what people are saying.
If there's people watching this who are just seething, I'm just telling you what I'm explaining to you is what it is. And and I believe that people need to reckon with the reality of the situation to actually approach this.
Realistic. That's the other word. Yeah. Or did I already use that one?
Into a meaningful conversation, because again, I can't emphasize how much the one state thing is impossible from the Israeli perspective.
Yeah.
But you talk about sanctions. I mean, if you look at Russia, Western leaders, they all predicted there would be a total collapse of Russia's economy, but all that happened was it made them more nationalistic, made them more resolved. It made them basically search out new partnerships. And I don't think that there's any evidence that Israel would be unable to do the same things. It would.
Just as a queer person, for me, not those two, not that I know of. For me as a queer person, the idea that someone, especially a straight man, would look me in the face and tell me equal rights will never, ever, ever happen. Never, ever, ever happen. The country is too homophobic, too blah, blah, blah. You have to you have to organize, you have to get coalitions. We're nowhere there. It will never happen. Maybe in 100 years, maybe in 60 years, it will never, ever happen. It does make me, to use Ethan's words, seethe with stubbornness, I suppose. It's not working. Ethan is not persuading me. I'll just say that.
Because the only times where a sanctions regime,
the
only time the sanctions regime has ever worked is if it's threatening our allies. That's it. We can actually sanction our allies. We cannot sanction our enemies in a way that stops them from finding a way to continue surviving with the same quality of life. Israel is a democracy for Israeli Jews, right? It's not a democracy for the Palestinian citizens of Israel. What's up?
I think this idea that sanctions would change anything is
because it would dramatically change the quality of life.
What's the evidence of that? When has that worked?
I gave you the evidence. It worked in South Africa. The fear of sanctions alone and businesses pulling out of South Africa alone was enough to change the attitude on the ground. It did work. And not only that, but also I'm using this as an example because Israel was allied with South Africa and they personally saw how successful this was in South Africa, which is why
South
AIPAC
Africa
made
apartheid is completely different than the situation that
completely different?
Israel, first of all, again, the Israelis believe that they will all be killed. So they're fighting for their survival.
The South African white population also believe that 100%.
They also have a ton of I feel like they have a lot of leverage in terms of their
everyone who has historically been the oppressor has always believed that once that oppression is not maintained, that the retribution will be just as violent, if not worse. And history has never shown an example of that in the way that it actually has like been an incredibly violent retribution.
Are you saying sanctions was singularly responsible for ending apartheid?
No, of course not.
And so what percentage of it would you say?
I don't know what the exact percentage what the sanctions would be, but all matter of conflict ultimately ends with a peaceful solution. No matter how violent the conflict is, it ends up with a negotiations process, right? I don't know what the exact percentage of what the sanctions was.
Yeah, that like sanctions had no impact on South Africa, on South African apartheid falling apart is ridiculous. I can't even believe Ethan like is arguing that the sanctions, because at first he's saying, oh, sanctions didn't even really help in South Africa. Sanctions are not going to really be helpful here on the apartheid state in West Asia. So that's why I'm against it, because it's not effective. It's not pragmatic. It's not blah, blah, blah. That's ahistorical to say that about South Africa. Sanctions literally were the thing that led the entire world to create a massive, massive pressure that was always there, but really sort of put it into focus. And that's how the regime fell apart. You can't argue that those sanctions were not effective in South Africa. The apartheid regime fell. Hello?
Of course, on the ground, violent actions was also a major factor in making this apartheid as costly as possible. But yes, international support being pulled out of South Africa was a gigantic burden for the South African economy, which forced the hands of South African politicians that wanted to maintain the apartheid into, making a new arrangement finally.
Do you think the global politics, geopolitics is that we see in the world today is comparable to what we saw then?
No, because I think the collapse of the USSR also was playing a role in that process.
Don't you think that like there's different allegiances and groups of nations forming, and one of them will take in Israel. There's just no shot.
The idea that someone might take in Israel is insignificant in this circumstance. You know why? Because the quality of life that Israel has afforded to at least Jews inside of Israel proper.
Sorry, this doesn't relate to Hasan's point. So sorry, Hasan, for interrupting you all the time. I just want to say, if Ethan says one more time, it will never happen. Even if you're just drinking water, take a sip. Okay, it will never ever happen. Let's see how long we wait.
Is one that people do not want to take away. This is the major difference. If you live in a country like Russia, your government is already positioned against America sanctioning you before America even sanctions you. So you can withstand sanctions. Israel, on the other hand, has never considered the quality of life shift that would be seismic if there was Western sanctions upon Israel. It's just like, it's untenable. There's no way out of it. There's no like, oh, we'll just like deal with China and then China will defend us while we still maintain the same quality of life.
Arms, they'll you know what I mean?
I'm not saying that there aren't.
There'll be a valuable exchange of goods, ideas, IP, weapons. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
certainly.
And by the way, Israel, I say this because people really need to understand how much they think that if they dissolve the borders, they will all be killed. They will use a nuclear bomb if they have to.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. It's like saying we can't fucking raise taxes on the wealthy because like they'll just pull out and go somewhere else. Like that's nuclear holocaust being an option in this situation is like a ridiculous one. Like,
I only say it because the only way I see this happening is a all-out war. That's the only way. And Israel, in that case, if they were on the back end of losing an all-out war, they would use a nuclear bomb.
Just have to throw out something here, and it's not acknowledged or in the media in any way that Israel even has a nuclear program. I think that's very much taboo to even mention or talk about. But those control over those nukes lies entirely with the United States. Israel isn't an entity separate and apart from the United States. They are one. They're one and the same. So Israel isn't going to use nukes without, in my opinion, right? This is allegedly just my opinion. They're not going to do that without sign off from the United States, or it would have to be at the behest of the United States making the call. Israel doesn't move unless the United States tells it to move. It's a proxy. It's a proxy in West Asia of the United States. Just my opinion, allegedly, all the stuff. Okay.
By the way, as far as the apartheid regime goes, I believe Israel was one of the countries that actually continued to support South Africa through the
Yeah,
embargo.
I know that they had a
but it
joint.
didn't work. It didn't work, right? Like
No,
at the end
I'm
of the
not
day,
defending Israel. I know
no,
Israel.
I'm not saying this to defend Israel. I'm saying it didn't work.
They had a joint operation with the South Americans to build nuclear bombs. I know they love them.
The reason why I mentioned that is because South Africa had allies as well, but they lost Western support. And when you lose Western support,
Israel
you
is
cannot,
not gonna give them
without
alone.
Western support.
It's not enough support from nations to make a significant.
No, it
difference.
is. It 100% is. If you are maintaining pressure on an ally, their economy will crumble so fucking fast that they will never ever be able to withstand it in the same way that a foreign adversary can. A foreign adversary can greatly diminish their quality of life because their quality of life is already not up to standard if you compare it to like Israel and the many benefits that Israeli citizens have and enjoy. That is a genuine political problem. That is a major political problem, which is why people will say sanctions only work on allies. They don't work on foreign adversaries. The Israeli population would not, in a million years, take a massive seismic shift in their quality of life. A lot of people would fucking probably try to believe.
They would. You don't understand. No. They would take the seismic shift. They would. That's the thing that you don't understand. They would. People underestimate what the fuck Israel means to the people that live there.
My point is always this: if BDS wasn't a genuine threat that Israel noticed and thought was like a legitimate threat, they would have not.
What does South Korea have to do with the conflict?
No, boycott, divestments, and sanctions on the state of Israel.
Oh, okay. Because BTS is, I do stand them.
Yes, we stand BTS. Don't get mad at us, please. But BDS in and of itself was originally. I've been throwing them up too. BDS, boycott, divestments, and sanctions, which is controversial because like sometimes there are sometimes it does over leverage, overextend itself for sure, and like goes after like random fucking groups and whatnot. But like as long as it's like steadily maintained, boycott, divestments, and sanctions is a successful way to apply pressure to Western governments to apply pressure to the state of Israel, just like it worked against apartheid South Africa.
Anyway, I think we're going on about the sanctions too much because the thing is, I guess we're at a bit of an impasse in that, like on one hand, looking at the two-state solution, I understand, there's so many fucking settlers now, and the government in charge of Israel has Netanyahu basically and his cabinet have gone so fucking far, have done so much damage to the cause of peace by encouraging and arming these psychotic freaks that are out there.
Every single government in the apartheid state that has ever been in existence since it was founded has been unethical, immoral, and genocidal towards Palestinians. Every single one. If you just look at the first Israeli Prime Minister Ben Gurion's quotes, evil piece of shit. I mean, just talking about Palestinians as animals, how they have to outnumber them demographically, how, there has never been blaming it all on one individual, Netanyahu, who is only in power because the United States wants to keep him in power and he has been in power for many, many years. Look at all the coups that the United States is able to sponsor all over the world, but somehow this one person in this one outpost that gets all of this money from the United States, he has some magical control. He just magically keeps getting. It's the same with the dictatorships in West Asia, like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain. All of them are propped up and supported by the United States. And there's a long history of the United States propping up and supporting fascist right-wing dictators, instead of democratically elected governments. So blaming it all on one individual, Netanyahu, to sort of deflect from the systemic issue, which is inequality under the law, denying people rights based on religion, that is the structural issue that has to change. It's not just Netanyahu. If you look at the Israeli Democrat Party, they're not offering anything different than Netanyahu is right now. So the idea that if they just switch out one person, for another, that things would be different. The difference has to happen structurally for it to make a difference.
Settlers, they're real villains. Israel they have removed settlements before, but not nearly that much, obviously. And so,
the only time they removed settlements was in 2005 when they pulled out of Gaza, and then they resettled those people in the West Bank. Right. So like that had happened. That was a big political move too that a lot of people were upset about.
So I don't know. It's tough because both options seem so fucking far-fetched because of the damage that's been done by Netanyahu's cabinet and him in the West Bank. That both of them seem so far-fetched.
This is, by the way, the settlements of the West Bank is precisely the reason why I'm saying that like a one state already exists currently, whether we like to admit it or not. It is a one singular apartheid state, which is why I believe in the dissolution of the apartheid.
But then if you're talking about integrating Hamas and PLO into the Israeli government.
Yes, just like I'm talking about integrating Jewish. That's why I'm talking about integrating the Jewish Power Party and many of the other far right Israeli components in Israeli society that actually enjoy great civil liberties currently, integrating them into society as well. If the conditions, I used Turkey as an example before.
Okay. Have to disagree with Hasan here. I think if we're looking at a post-apartheid reality in Palestine, just my opinion, I think Zionism has to be made illegal. Because what is Zionism, right? Zionism is racism. Zionism is inequality under the law. Zionism is the idea of giving one group of people privileges and rights that are denied to anyone who's not a member of a specific religion. That's inequality. That's racist. Those parties, let's say there's a Zionist party that wants to run in a new post-apartheid government coalition. I believe any party that advocates for inequality under the law, like a Zionist party, should be disqualified from running. I believe anyone who identifies as a racist should be disqualified from running for office. And of course, because Palestinians will be in a post-apartheid world, the demographic majority, there's no reason to believe that they would vote for a Zionist party anyway. But still, Zionism has to be illegal to create true reconciliation. Okay, Jewish people will still be able to live and be treated as equal citizens. Okay, not the crazy settlers in the West Bank. Don't get me wrong. But Zionism should not be allowed to exist in any form in Palestine. So I think I also think that about the United States. We have parties that are offering, like Christian nationalist parties, whatever. I believe they should be disqualified. If you're a political party and you only want to give rights to one group of people and not others, why should you be allowed to be in politics at all?
Have long been a supporter of Kurdish people in developing a nation state for themselves. 35 million Kurdish people live in diaspora. I believe that they have a right to have a nation state for themselves in this region. And I think that there's a tremendous number of Kurdish people that are oppressed in the country of Turkey. If the treatment of Kurdish people in Turkey resembled the treatment of Palestinians in Israel in a singular secular nation state, this would be a dramatic improvement on their quality of life. It would be celebrated by the Western world as a tremendous accomplishment. People would literally be celebrating it in the fucking streets. They'd be like, this is it, we did it. So this does not mean that Kurdish people are not mistreated in Turkey. They certainly are. But that's how poor the structure is currently in the singular apartheid regime in Israel.
I think you've definitely said stuff that I hadn't thought about in terms of how one state would be possible, and certainly thinking about it on a long term over maybe a 50-year span. Then it really seems.
Oh my God! Did we make a breakthrough again? Did it happen? Is the light back on? Is the light back on? Is anybody home? Inside Ethan's head. Look at me trying so hard to be hopeful here. Because I really want to believe that people can change. And ultimately Zionism is an ideology. Something that Ali Abu Nima always says, that I think is brilliant. Author Ali Abu Nima and editor-in-chief at Electronic Intifada. Something he always says is that all Zionism is a choice, right? Zionism is not a national. Actually, it's an apartheid state ideology, right? But it's not a genetic trait. Zionism, it's not. It's an ideology. It's a set of belief that Jewish people should have more rights than the native Palestinian population. That's Zionism. So I want to believe that people can outgrow those ideological predispositions because of their upbringing or whatever Ethan was exposed to in his childhood, and the pro-Israel bias that can exist in a lot of institutions. So I want to be hopeful, but I know how this is going to end, and it's not going to end well. Unfortunately.
More likely that something like that could happen. But I don't think that people who discuss this, I don't know what's the right word because I know it's so sensitive with leftist and liberal and all this shit. I don't like fucking saying all that shit. But people who are, and I don't even want to say pro-Palestinian activists either, because I can say that maybe. Can I say pro-Palestinian? Because I feel that I advocate for the Palestinian people too. My perspective is just that I don't think the people who talk about this understand how far Israel will go.
I support Palestinians. I just don't support giving them equal rights. I love Palestinians. I have Palestinian friends. I just don't want to give them equal rights, and I think it will never, ever, 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 ever happen. Yeah, what a great ally you are, truly.
To make sure that that never happens.
I do. I oftentimes don't want to showcase like the full-blown Israeli perspective on this matter in an effort to save face, because I understand precisely how dangerous and how violent the rhetoric actually is, and how right-wing the rhetoric actually is. Just like in the United States of America, if you look back at like I don't know, the sentiment expressed towards Black people in the civil rights movement, yeah, there is a steady flow of misinformation and anger that builds up and resentment that builds up on the side that is the party in power, that has to exist so that you can maintain the structures of inequality. This has historically always been the case, and yet when all is said and done, we have the capacity to adapt. And no matter how violent the perspectives of Israelis might be, and there is still always going to be a way to prove to every single person that the best permanent security solution is one that revolves around offering Palestinians a life of dignity.
And
Discounts the
people,
two-state
people
solution.
do understand that. It's just getting there is the fucking problem, you know. Obviously,
dignity is like such a weird, amorphous, vague term. You know, it's like when politicians talk about, I support Palestinians' right to self-determination, to dignity, to blah blah blah. Like, you know, it's any word but equality, any word under the dictionary except equality. There's a resistance to pun intended, to saying that word, especially in the American discourse. You know, it's very triggering for people to mention it, but that is the issue. Zionism is inequality. Zionism is racism, but the root of Zionism is inequality based on religion and who you're denying rights to. And the antidote to inequality is equality, not dignity. Dignity is something that Ethan would say he supports for Palestinians, except on paper, he would still deny them freedom of movement, freedom of being equal citizens in their own country, you know.
No, I get that. I mean,
you know, I
understand
think it's funny when people go, I see this clip going around the internet all the time where they go like, Israel versus Palestine. It's not complicated. It's super simple. And I've seen you say it. You say apartheid, is it good? Yes or no? Obviously no. And that's not the hard part about this conflict. Everybody can easily tell you apartheid is bad. The hard part of this conflict is deciding what the fuck to do about it. And in that regard, it is extremely complicated.
Am I being punked? I mean, Hasan literally is telling you what to do about it. Give people equal rights that you've been denying them those rights for 80 fucking years. It's not complicated. It is simple. Why there are so many mental blocks to getting people to see through Zionism? It's really shocking.
Yes. Here's the thing, though. I think that you are surrounded by people who are very like-minded in many respects. So you don't see the other side of the conversation, because a lot of people do say that Israel's not an apartheid, and it is actually very complicated. That they're not talking about the solution.
Hold on. What side is it you're saying I'm not exposed to?
Like,
which side?
People say like, you know, oh, it's very complicated. What they're really trying to do is like to make you drop it. Basically, if you're like trying to talk about Palestine with anyone, the talking point to sort of get you out of it is to say, oh no, but it's very complicated. You don't know what you're talking about. You need to read 7 more books, and then maybe you can talk about it, but even then it will be complicated. It's just too complicated. So complicated. So fucking complicated. Because what they want you to do is to just give up and say, you're right, I'm a nobody. I don't know anything. It's complicated. Just gonna drop it. Like it's a scam. To call it complicated is a fucking scam. And it's only because we have, you know, the way we share information now in terms of the internet and how we can Google stuff, even if Google is not perfect, or we can look at articles, we can look at news. It used to be that the media that we would consume was, or that people would consume around the world, especially in the 90s, the early 2000s, you'd have to like tune into a TV channel and like get all of your information from that one news program that showed up at 8. And if you were doing something else at 8, you can't go back and listen to it unless you had a TiVo, another you know, or a cable or something that records it, whatever, VHS. It used to be harder to like track these kinds of issues and, you know, global issues, and unless you lived under those conditions or were Palestinian and you had family members who can directly sort of speak to their experience and educate you. It used to be harder to know the truth. That's why I think a lot of people were lied into the Iraq war, for example. You know, it used to be a lot easier before the internet to spread propaganda and lies and say things like, oh, it's just really complicated, drop it, forget about it, don't worry about it, do something else with your life, find a hobby. But now, because of the nature of the world we all live in and the connectivity that exists between, different people from all over the world and being able to share information, I think it's easier to see through propaganda, especially when it's bad.
Mike's overly.
I think you're talking to like-minded people like myself more
Mhm.
so than I guess like people who you're talking to people who already have like established
Okay.
Israel's an apartheid state, because the overwhelming majority do not consider it that.
I agree, and that's why it's important to frame these kinds of conversations, because I understand that the rhetoric, mainstream rhetoric in Israel and in America, is way, way, way to the right of where we're talking now. So I understand that. Some people might look at this conversation and say that like you're missing the point. I know that. I'm trying to engage in a good faith discussion. I don't need to acknowledge people that are like, oh, we need to kill all the fucking Gazans. Like, obviously that's insane. You know what I mean?
But that's
And,
not even what we're saying. Like,
damnable.
there are plenty of people who are like, oh man, I really sure feel bad about the Gazans, but also like Israel has security concerns, so they have to eradicate Hamas. I hear varying degrees of this kind of sentiment expressed from a diverse group of people, and ultimately a lot of this still revolves around like, I hate Netanyahu, but we have to keep letting him do what he's doing, even though Netanyahu and what he has done so far in Gaza is simply a continuation of the multiple decades of arrogance on behalf of Israeli politics, assuming that like this apartheid regime can be maintained without any severe violent repercussions, not even listening to its own internal security forces like Shin Bet. These guys are not fucking woke, obviously. They're, their job is, Shin Bet, their job is to literally defend Israel's internal security. Like when you have former leaders and also current existing Shin Bet members tell the Netanyahu government, hey, stop fucking over people in the West Bank because this is going to cause a major collapse. This is becoming a security issue, to which the Netanyahu government responds with, you're fucking woke, shut the fuck up. The deep state has infiltrated Shin Bet. We're not going to listen to you. When you have, former Israeli leaders saying that like this regime is far too brutal at this point to continue without any severe repercussions, and you have 76% of the population saying we want to fucking fire Netanyahu, we want Netanyahu to leave, while simultaneously supporting his actions in Gaza, there's this mismatch here. There's this disconnect. People want some kind of retribution, and that's understandable, of violent retribution, and yet they don't recognize that violent retribution is what causes more violence down.
This might not be a perfect analogy, but it reminds me sort of when people would talk about kind of George W. Bush. I mean, he obviously oversaw the Iraq War, and he was kind of like the main scapegoat, where Americans would say like, oh, it's because of him, we hate him, anybody but Bush, blah blah blah, like, but at the end of the day, a lot of people still, even if they sort of threw Bush under the bus, they still supported invading Iraq until very, very late on. And as long as, it was kind of easy to have one person at the helm that everybody could blame and say like, oh, we're not like that, but still, but we're not going to stop it from happening. It actually, I think, excuses all of the people up and down the chain who made a decision. The decision to invade Iraq had to have been in the works for years beforehand, and to topple Saddam Hussein. That happened. That was like a part of like a gradual plan, to sort of to reshape the Middle East and the economic structures that defined, Iraq, Libya, Syria. It was part of a larger, plan that, it's not like Bush woke up one day and said, I'm going to invade Iraq today. Like, it was a plan that had to be in the works, and that went beyond him in terms of culpability. And a lot of the people who were also responsible got away with it because Bush took all of the blame. Also, kind of, now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm thinking kind of like, Biden took all of the heat for and don't get me wrong, Genocide Joe deserves all the heat until he's not not with us, I guess, anymore, but deserves all the heat in the world. But there were also people up and down the chain, Secretary of State, advisors, people who deserve just as much of the blame, in terms of the genocide and what happened. It goes beyond the person at the helm only.
The line. This is how Hamas came to power. And unless you do full-blown ethnic cleansing, you are never going to be able to take care of this problem through violent means. It doesn't work that way. History has only been solved in the exact opposite direction. But I do want to hear what your perspective is. Like, what do you think is the solution? Because I think you believe in a two-state solution, right?
I just, in terms of what's pragmatic, yeah.
So,
and again, I don't know how pragmatic it is, because even saying it seems so fucking crazy, because like you said, but I think it is. I don't know if it's possible. But just from my perspective, which is that the dissolution of the borders will never ever happen, is that I think that obviously lifting, I think removing the settlers from the West Bank, that's obviously the biggest problem. Like, I don't know how you're going to do that.
So how do you think you can remove 750,000 people living in occupied territory right now, whether it be both East Jerusalem, which is very densely populated, but also within the West Bank, where there is 451,000 people living there?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you could do it by force, or you could just say you guys are on your own now. Like, this isn't our territory.
Yeah, but don't you think that would be incredibly violent? Like,
It would be. That would be horrible.
And there's also no reason for them to do that, because I don't think that that's what Israel wants. I think what Israel wants historically, or at least what it's shown me and others, Israeli scholars themselves who have changed their perspective from a two-state solution to a single-state solution as well, is that we're just going to keep dangling the peace negotiations in an effort to slowly but surely push out Palestinians from their own ancestral homes, as we did.
And that's the trick with the two-state delusion, right? And what made Edward Said, he was part of the PLO negotiations to sort of, in the beginning, to try to get the Oslo Agreement going. He was a part of it, and then he resigned from it because he realized that the two-state solution, quote unquote, was a fucking scam meant to get Palestinians to sign all of these agreements that entrench the occupation and make it worse, which is what happened under Oslo. It was sold as a peace process that ended up making occupation in every way worse for Palestinians. There are 900 checkpoints right now in the West Bank that didn't used to exist to sort of to destroy, and settlements have been expanding and expanding in the West Bank ever since then. So Edward Said is one of the people who used to believe in a two-state solution and ended up on the other side of it, coming out on the other side of it and supporting a one-state solution. And even that framing one-state solution, it was he coined that term. That term didn't used to exist, but it was specifically designed to sort of get Western audiences who are who have been so propagandized at that point. It was in the 90s when he wrote his article for the New York Times, One State Solution. And the framing of it was sort of designed to counteract the propaganda around the two-state solution, which was everywhere, right? And, because I mean, I don't know this, but I feel like it was some kind of a marketing political consultant class that came up with the two-state solution, because it sounds good on paper, right? Two-state, and then the word solution, right? So it convinces people to believe that this is a solution that we should be supporting, and it's reasonable, and it's like two states, two people, blah blah blah, and to sort of sell the idea of Zionism as something that people can digest, when really the West has never been serious about two states, never, not once in 80 years. It could have happened by now if it was going to, but and one of the reasons that the United States refuses to just say, what, let's just have a Palestinian state on the 67 borders, let's cut our losses, let's just do it. Why not? Let's try it. The reason why they're not trying it is because a Palestinian state, even if it were to happen, right? Let's say a Palestinian state next to an Israeli state, the Palestinian state would have more people, demographically speaking, especially if Palestinians were allowed to return to, let's say they were, which is unjust to have them return to the West, only to the West Bank and Gaza, because people were expelled from within Israeli borders. But if there were two states, they would be allowed to return to only the West Bank or Gaza. That Palestinian state would demographically outweigh the Israeli demographics, which have been declining every year for the past decade, I believe. So you would have a Palestinian state with more people, and then next to an Israeli state with less people. From an from an American security perspective, Israeli perspective, they don't want to have a recognized state on their border that has more people, essentially, than the Israeli state. That's why it has been a war of demographics from the start. So, and that's why they'll never allow a two-state solution either. So if they're not going to allow a two-state solution and they're not going to allow a one-state solution, it's better to go for the moral, just solution, which is the one-state solution. But sorry, I've been ranting here.
You want me to answer the question?
What's up?
You want me to answer the question you asked?
Yeah.
So I believe that's the biggest problem. But removing them and lifting the barriers of lifting the walls, creating a Palestinian state. There'd probably need to be. I know in 1948 there was talks about a train that connected Gaza and the West Bank or something like that. But I don't know. Maybe there'd be some concessions of land there to make it continuous. And also, I would be in favor of some kind of reparations too. Now, again, that seems far fetched. It does seem far fetched. I get it. It's granted, but like, it's so hard. It's equal.
I just hate that Ethan is basing every single thing he supports or doesn't support based on like his own vibes or sense. It's not based on like, I read this argument from this person and this is what Palestinians have been advocating for, so that's why I support it. It's all just like, I feel like this is going to be okay. Like, let's just find a compromise that to me sounds okay in my head. And that's what I'll support, whatever. Like maybe Palestinians can have like a train between Gaza and the West. Just the arrogance here, like the chutzpah, shall I say?
Equally hard for me to. It's harder for me actually to imagine Israel ever conceding.
Do you think Israel would concede to a two-state
hard for me
solution?
to imagine equality for Palestinians, so I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to try. I mean, it's just hard for me. It's hard for me. Do you know how hard it is for me to imagine equality for Palestinians? It's just so hard. So I guess they can't have that, and I shouldn't advocate for that. And too bad. It's so hard being me.
I mean, I think there would be an appetite for it if the situation was, if like the vibes were right, to put it in a silly way. If there was a fair duration of peace and goodwill talks. If you go back again to Arafat and Rabin, even though a lot of Palestinians were not happy with it, but if you can go back to 1948 and make more concessions, I don't know, man. I don't fucking know. I don't know. They both seem so far-fetched and difficult, if I'm being honest.
Yes.
Because the settler situation just ruins the whole fucking thing. There's just
okay. Maybe this is another like moment of breakthrough. I mean, look how naive I am, But maybe this is another moment where he's like, okay, well, maybe if both solutions are impractical, maybe we should go with the moral solution here, the just solution, the one like maybe he's being nudged in the right direction. Maybe not. Who knows?
too many settlers.
So
But,
to me, this was the
right.
opportunity.
I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe one state is more likely. Maybe I can see it, but like I just have a hard time reconciling that. But the way that you explained it definitely does make me think that it could be possible over a long period of time. So it would have to be 50 years.
He keeps playing with my heart over here. He keeps pulling me back, pulling me out, pulling me in, pulling me everywhere. My God, but that's wow. Wow, look at that. We started with it will never, ever, ever happen to like, maybe it is the right thing to do. I mean, wow.
From now, and we didn't nuke the whole planet, and somehow there's been a period of relative peace and calming of tensions and stuff. Yeah. I can see it.
But that starts in good faith, and there's always going to be people who want to fuck that up.
But even if the one state, there's still going to be these radical, fundamental settlers there that the Palestinians are going to want to fucking kill, rightfully, right? Or I mean, I don't killing people isn't right, but there's going to be fundamental Islamists.
No, exactly, absolutely. Yeah. You're right about that. Except this is something that I talked to Jake about because I think Jake's understanding is like kind of childish of the matter. He always says like, "Oh, it's religion." It's
Cenk for president, bro.
Yeah, Cenk for president. He's gonna do.
Cenk Uyghur, who's Hasan's uncle, I believe, and also Cenk is, even though he goes on Piers Morgan to pretend to be pro-Palestinian, Cenk is a Zionist. Cenk supports the two-state delusion. Honestly, Hasan should have. I mean, I'm sure he has already, but you should really get Cenk to support the one-state solution too. I mean, because that's ridiculous. Cenk should not be a Zionist at this point. No one should be a Zionist. We should all be anti-Zionists.
Do it. He's going to do the damn thing.
You're the VP?
But no. But well, I could actually technically run for president. He can't because I'm an American citizen. He's not. He's a naturalized American citizen. I am a natural born U.S. citizen. So one thing I want to say is this: he always says like, "Oh, well, it's a religious war." I'm like, no, it's not. Here's obviously it's not.
Think
about it.
Just on the conversation of presidents. LOL, I forgot that Cenk was even running for president. Hasan, no offense, but I think if Democrats wanted to run, this is not in me to rehabilitate the Democratic Party after the genocide. I don't see myself ever voting for them again under any circumstances. I think we have been feeding into an abusive system because the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have a monopoly on power, they get to just throw the ball between them and we are the ball, the voters. So I don't believe that they're incentivized in any way to even offer people solutions. In their mind, in Democrats' minds, we are going to win the midterms, and because the opposition party always wins the midterms after losing a presidential election. Historically speaking, the party out of power always wins the midterm. They think they just need to wait out the clock. They don't need to really get people on board, not really, or offer anything substantively different than Republicans. They don't think they need to do anything because they think the winds of history and precedents will just have them cruise into victory by being the opposition party. I feel in my bones that the Democratic Party is going to lose the midterms this year. I don't have any proof. I'm not psychic. But I genuinely believe they're going to lose the midterms this year, which would be historically, it would go against historical precedents where the opposition party always wins after losing so the Republicans retook the House when after Biden was elected, like 2 years after. So that's what Democrats think will happen. They can just count on that. I think they're going to lose. It's going to buck the historical trends, and I think maybe then there will be some soul searching. Not going to hold my hopes up, but what I was going to say is that if Democrats were truly interested in attracting back voters who left Democrats over the genocide specifically, people who maybe voted for Biden in 2020 and stayed home over the genocide in 2024, if they wanted to bring them back or at least offer them something meaningfully different in a presidential candidate, they would elevate Rashida Tlaib. She is the only member of Congress who is anti-Zionist. She is way more competent, popular, and right on the issues than AOC has ever been. AOC is a Zionist. AOC voted to affirm Israel's right to exist as a Jewish exclusivist state. Rashida Tlaib has been anti-Zionist since she got into Congress. J Street actually unendorsed Rashida Tlaib in 2018 because J Street supports the two-state solution, of course. And because Rashida supports the one-state solution, they unendorsed her, and she won her election anyway, and re-elections. So if Democrats were truly serious about speaking to these disaffected voters, she would be their most compelling candidate to run. No offense to Hasan. She would be the person to run for president. Democrats are never going to run her for president. I mean, not unless they were 1,000% sure they can lock her out of the nomination, and then maybe they would let her run like a presidential candidacy, raise a bunch of money, and then drop out before the primaries even start. I can see them maybe using her that way. But I think even then, they don't want to let her gain any momentum whatsoever, even though she has been an elected Democrat for almost 10 years now. So if they were smart, if they actually thought they needed to appeal to people, they would seriously consider running Rashida Tlaib. They won't do that.
Way. We have our own versions of psychopathic fundamentalist terrorists, right? And every now and then there's an act of stochastic terror, and that's devastating, and we deal with it through the normal criminal court system. That's what will happen. I'm not saying that it's going to be perfect and everyone's going to get together, hold hands, and say kumbaya, okay? That everyone's going to hug and kiss one another. But what we do have a tendency to collaborate with one another. We do have a tendency to live in peace. That's what we want to do. So,
and that's why I think the issue of Zionism being inequality under the law has to be addressed through the law. Where Zionism is illegal, all forms of discrimination based on religion, race, ethnicity should be illegal under the law. And then from there, once you have a legal system that is just and moral and treats people equally, then you can you can legally go after people who are crazy supremacists, Jewish supremacists in the West Bank, who vandalize, terrorize Palestinians, kill them for no reason, torture them. Once you have a legal framework that actually doesn't support inequality, but supports equality, then you have the state structure designed to sort of root out these racists out of the society. It has to be addressed of course through sanctions, but also in the law and on writing. And of course, the law isn't perfect. In the United States, we have equal rights under the law constitutionally based on all of these constitutional amendments. Obviously, the United States was not formed on equal rights whatsoever. We all know that. But at least, and there's a ton of work left to do. But at least under the letter of the law, equal rights, regardless of race or religion, is what's guaranteed to every American. And that's why there's peace in a state like New York, where tons of Jewish people live right alongside tons of Muslim people and Christian people and people of no faith. You can have a religion or no religion, but at least under the law, and what the courts are going by, is everyone treated equally.
So ultimately, if there is a structure, if there's a one-state structure, of course, there's going to be fucking psychotic like Jewish power people and also Islamist fundamentalists, or even people who are like, nah, fuck that, I want to kill settlers regardless. Those guys are going to go to jail. Just like the kickstarting of that process also revolves around making sure that there is a tribunal for war criminals on both sides, being able to capture and also bring to justice war criminals on both sides of the equation.
What do you do about the settlements that are there now? I guess you're saying it doesn't matter because everybody can live wherever they want.
The settlements are precisely the reason why I don't believe in a two-state solution, because I don't believe that there is any reasonable way to eradicate 400,000 people and then 230,000 from Jerusalem. Like that, you cannot do that in a peaceful way.
I think it's so fucked up, right?
I think a lot of those people who are sick in the head and have decided to sort of take on this religious, I'm using in quotes, right? Like this religious conquest and going into East Jerusalem, taking over homes, kicking out Palestinians, terrorizing them in the West Bank. The reason they're able to do that is because of the legal structure that allows Jewish people to have exclusive rights anywhere between the river and the sea, and denying them to Palestinians on that basis. If there was an equal right, if there were equal rights between the river and the sea, a lot of those people, crazy psychos who have been colonizing East Jerusalem and the West Bank, they would leave because the legal incentive would no longer be there, and we would have to have an enforcement mechanism to get them out. And also, like, this is something that smarter people than me will have to work through. But like, I'm thinking of, like, let's say there are neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, for example, like Sheikh Jarrah, where recently settlers came from outside, like from the United States, from wherever, and decided to sue Palestinian families out of their homes. They would fake deeds to their homes and say, like, oh, actually, I have something from the Ottoman Empire from 200 years ago, and it says that you're living in my house, even though it's from 300 years ago. So even though you have a deed from 100 years ago, I have a deed from 300 years ago, so you needed to leave. We have to have Palestinians who were kicked out under these circumstances with the approval of the Zionist courts. They would have to be able to return, and there would have to be a legal mechanism for them to be able to go back to their original homes. I'm thinking of people, for example, in Sheikh Jarrah, they should be allowed to go back to their homes, and the settlers who took over their homes, cruelly through a legal system, should move out. Maybe the way to deal with that is to sort of say to these psycho settlers, like, we'll give you housing units, I don't know, like, somewhere like very far away, but you were not allowed to have, you should not have been able to take over a Palestinian family's home. That is insane. Maybe they can create new housing units in a town far, far away, that might have more of a Jewish population, so it's not like they're gonna make them homeless. But I don't know. But there has to be the Palestinians should be allowed to return to their homes.
No, it's crazy how fucked up it is. Both options seem like pipe dreams right now in this point in time.
I'll tell you this much. What changed for me, what I realized was, like, especially in this last iteration, this last like counter to the October 7 tragedy. What I realized was, I guess it made it permanent in my mind, is that the Israeli government, completely removed from the interest of the Israeli Israeli citizenry, operates with a one-track mind. They care more about expelling Palestinians, not always like ethnically cleansing, but ethnically displacing Palestinians from this territory, from the territories they occupy, than they do about the safety and security of the Israeli citizens. I saw this being reflected by those who had been victim to the attacks on Kibbutz Be'eri and other kibbutzim as well. Some of the victims immediately after, while they were still trying to figure out where their family members were in that hotel in the Dead Sea, and they basically were reflecting on the things that had happened, and they were saying a similar thing, that it's like, if you care more about like killing Palestinians or pushing Palestinians into the sea than you do about like the safety and security of the Israeli citizens, like, of course this is going to happen. It's going to continue happening over and over again. And why am I saying this? Because on October 7th and October 8th and October 9th, there were still Palestinian militants inside of Israeli boundaries. But what was the first action that Israel engaged in? The first action that Israel engaged in for the first 2 days was immediately to start bombing Gaza. To me, it's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, protect your own borders.
What do you think Israel should have done in response to October 7th?
I think obviously overtaking and maintaining permanent security in.
Oh my God. Okay. I thought I could get through all of this tonight. But there's unfortunately a lot more to go. Let me see how much longer. Oh my God, we're only an hour and a half in, so it's about an hour left of their conversation before the big breakdown. So I'm gonna save that for part 3, final part. I don't think anyone's gonna see this stream, but if by chance you tuned in, like at some point in the future, I mean, yeah, time is an illusion, so whatever. Like, hello, well, nice to meet you, sort of, in another dimension. And I'll see you tomorrow, and when I'll be covering the last of this conversation between Hasan Piker and Ethan Klein. Thank you for joining me. I hope this has been good content for you to listen to if you're cleaning or changing your cat's litter or taking your dogs on a walk or running some sort of an errand, because we all need something to listen to that isn't too Zionisty. Anyway, thank you for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time.